systematically generates the diversified laws of nature governing the universe. So, qualitatively, we know the unified field is a self-aware, dynamic field of intelligence, and those are the properties of consciousness. So I bring this up because for many material scientists especially, the idea that consciousness is fundamental in nature is new, very novel. In the past, consciousness has somehow thought to emerge by many material scientists as a byproduct of electrophysiological processes of the brain. Certainly, the electrophysiological processes of the brain are instrumental to shaping the content of our experience, to cognitive processing, to sensory experience, and everything. But the actual phenomenon of the wakefulness itself, consciousness itself, transcends the physical brain and is fundamental in nature. Those who studied quantum mechanics should already be aware of the fact that the deeper you go in the structure of nature, the less material nature becomes, and the more the qualities of consciousness become expressed through things like the non-locality of the collapse of the wave function and many other features of quantum mechanics. But it is important to point out, I think for some of us at least, that the phenomenon of consciousness has defied description on the basis of such a superficial approach as a purely emergent phenomenon of the brain. It doesn't work philosophically. It doesn't work neurophysiologically. No neuroscientist has ever found that magical bundle of nerves that creates consciousness in the brain. There is no such bundle of nerves. Consciousness bubbles up from within every cell. Indeed, from within the DNA in every living cell. And the quantum mechanical nature of the DNA within the cell. The roots of human consciousness go very, very deep in the structure of natural law, from the classical to the quantum mechanical to the quantum field theoretic. So we have this qualitative identity of consciousness in the unified field, but more importantly, in this scientific age, mathematical age, I wanted to show for you a very important and profound quantitative verification, a quantitative correspondence between the structure of consciousness, pure consciousness, the most fundamental state of consciousness, this unbounded unified field of consciousness, and the unified field at the basis of physical matter. This quantitative correspondence can be seen on two levels. First, the so-called energy eigenspectrum of the unified field, the stable vibrational states of the superstring. This chart summarizes the stable vibrational states of the superstring, the so-called energy eigenmodes, the resonant frequencies of unity. The resonant frequencies, or energy eigenstates of the unified field, fall into 5 fundamental categories labeled by their quantum mechanical spins. Reading from left to right on this chart, we have on the left the spin 2 graviton, responsible for the field of gravity. The spin 3 halves gravitino field, its supersymmetric partner. The spin 1 forces, that's the strong, weak, and electromagnetic forces. The spin 1/2 matter fields, the quarks and leptons, and the spin 0 Higgs fields. These 5 categories are the only categories consistent with mathematics and with quantum mechanics. That means the whole physical universe can be understood as a combination of these 5 fundamental elements or ingredients, the quantum spin types. For completeness, though, let's see the same chart again, and I'll express the very same reality through the lens of supersymmetry. Today's supersymmetric unified quantum field theories present an even simpler picture, because in supersymmetry, these 5 fundamental elements are further unified. On the left, on the bottom, we see the gravity superfield, which is a unification of the spin 2 graviton and spin 3 halves gravitino. We have the category of gauge superfields, which constitute the spin 1 forces and spin 1/2 matter fields. And finally, matter superfields, the unification of spinless Higgs fields and spin 1/2 matter fields. So whether we talk in the language of 3, the supersymmetric unified quantum field theories, or in the language of 5, it's the same reality. These are the fundamental frequencies of unity, the building blocks of the entire creation, the emergent physical structures from the non-physical field of unity, beyond space and time. the field of quantum gravity, superunification. Now if we turn to the field of consciousness, the field of consciousness in its maximally expanded state of least excitation, the ground state of consciousness, the meditative state. This consciousness has its own set of reverberant frequencies, its own energy eigenmodes, which occur when this field of consciousness arises into the active fields of thought and speech and action. But the most fundamental impulses of thought, finest level of feeling, have a very verifiable structure. The modes of consciousness have this fivefold structure of Akash, Vayu, Tejas, Apas, and Prithvi. The same 5 fundamental elements that have been identified as the vibrational frequencies of the superstring. This next chart shows this correspondence a little bit more clearly. It shows on the left-hand side, from top to bottom, the 5 fundamental spin types of quantum field theory, the 5 fundamental elements of the physical universe. On the right-hand side, it shows the 5 fundamental vibrational states of consciousness, those aspects or modes of consciousness responsible for physical creation. These are, again, Akasha, Vayu, Tejas, etc. Now first, if we consider this correspondence purely structurally, we see 5 on the left and 5 on the right. But we also see on the left what we described before, a very specific pairing of these 5 elements into 3 more holistic entities called superfields, the gravity, gauge, and matter superfields. On the right, it turns out, this very same pairing is experienceable in terms of human consciousness and is described in the Vedic literature. Vedic literature is the classic text of consciousness. Very, very precisely, very lucidly, and very extensively, the structure of consciousness and its reverberant modes, the physical expressions of consciousness into thought and matter, are of these 5 types that admit, as we can see again, 3 fundamental pairings. Akasha and Vayu on the top unite in what is called Vata Prakriti. Tejas and Apas below that unite into the structure of Pitta Prakriti. Apas and Prithvi on the bottom unite to form Kapha Prakriti. So these identical pairings are considered to be fundamental from the standpoint of both modern science and the Vedic science of consciousness, open to direct experience. So here we have a profound quantitative correspondence between the modes of consciousness and the modes of the unified field, which powerfully support the identity of this field of pure consciousness, the meditative state, and the unified field at the basis of the physical universe. If we could look back at this chart for just one moment longer, we could, if we had time, and I'll just do one quick example, look at each of these realities, the spin 2 graviton, the spin 3/2 gravitino, etc., and see the precise structural and functional correspondence between the 5 elements of Vedic science, the 5 modes of consciousness. We'll just look at the top one, the spin 2 graviton. What is the spin 2 graviton? What is the force of gravity? Well, according to Einstein, the field of gravity is nothing other than the curvature of space. Space-time as a dynamical medium. Space-time as subtle substance. What is Akasha according to direct experience? What is Akasha according to the Vedic literature? It is space as subtle substance, the subtlest of all elements, sometimes translated as ether. So the correspondence between the modes of consciousness, the physical expressions of consciousness, and the physical expressions of the superstring, one by one, are the same. Same in number, same in structure, same in function, providing a very profound quantitative correspondence between the unified field of consciousness and the unified field of physics, establishing their identity, which is very important for what we're going to understand shortly. For the sake of interest, and it is a fascinating field, and we'll take just a moment now, I would like to take this analysis one step deeper. We have seen in this chart the quantitative correspondence between the emergent structures that physically arise from the non-physical field of the superstring, or the non-physical field of consciousness. We've seen that these are 5 in number, and that can be integrated into three more holistic entities called prakritis, or superfields. But instead, let's look at the same chart a little more deeply. Let's not look at what are called energy eigenmodes. These are the physical expressions of the superstring, the vibrational states of the superstring that correspond to the fundamental particles and forces within the field of space and time. But let us instead now look deeper. Look below the Planck scale. Look deep in that area called the unified field. Let us consider now not the physical expressions of the unified field, but the unified field itself on its own unified level. On the level of the unified field itself, from the standpoint of the superstring, we don't have particles and forces. We have the dynamics of this abstract reality called a superstring in unmanifest space-time, quantum geometry consisting of higher dimensions, 11 dimensions of space and time, or 10-dimensional space-time. The superstring has its own, on its own level, the level of unity, has its own abstract vibrational degrees of freedom, they're called, not energy eigenmodes, but vibrational degrees of freedom. These are just the different directions in which the string can vibrate. Let's think very concretely for an instant about a bosonic string in 10 dimensions. How many degrees of freedom does the string possess? Well, a string living in 10 dimensions of space-time, one dimension pertains to time, simply. A second dimension corresponds to the direction or axis of the string itself, and the remaining 8 spatial directions are perpendicular to the string, allowing the string 8 transverse directions in which it can vibrate. Therefore, it is said, students of physics say, the bosonic string in 10 space-time dimensions has 8 bosonic degrees of freedom, and so forth. Well, realistic implementations of the string today cast the string in a multi-dimensional, topologically non-trivial space-time, a so-called supercompactified space-time, unmanifest space-time, in which the vibrational degrees of freedom are more complex. These internal degrees of freedom of the superstring are shown in the next final scientific chart. On the bottom of this chart, running from the extreme left to the extreme right, is the Lagrangian of the superstring in 2 formulations. The superstring in 10 space-time dimensions constitutes the first line, comprising 8 bosonic and 8 fermionic vibrational degrees of freedom. And underneath it is the somewhat more familiar formulation of the superstring in 4 space-time dimensions, comprising 64 plus 64 plus 64 equals 192 fermionic vibrational degrees of freedom. This number of 192 is not arbitrary. This is absolutely dictated to us by logical consistency, mathematical consistency, quantum consistency. There's nothing fuzzy about it. This is the nature, this is the structure of the constitution of the universe. It can be nothing else. 50 years of quantum gravity and a decade of superstring theory has shown us that this is the case. There is a very precise mathematical structure of unity, consistent with quantum mechanics and mathematics. And that is this 192-fold structure, the vibrational structure of the superstring. We could go into this at some point in much greater detail, but for now, just the number is significant. Now let us compare this scientifically verified mathematical structure of unity, the constitution of the universe from the standpoint of modern physics, compare that to the structure of human consciousness in its most expanded state, the state of pure consciousness. We have seen before that when consciousness emerges into the field of thought, speech, and action, it is all in terms of these 5 physical elements, the 5 fundamental physical degrees, physical vibrational states of consciousness. But within this completely abstract and unmanifest field of consciousness itself, prior to the emergence of concrete thought and action, within the abstract silence of consciousness itself, consciousness is heard reverberating. Consciousness is humming within itself. Consciousness is a very dynamic and lively reality. That's what makes consciousness awake. That's what makes awareness lively. It is teeming with unmanifest activity, Zitterbewegung, zero-point activity. This is the zero-point motion of consciousness, completely unmanifest vibrations of consciousness. And this unmanifest structure of consciousness